Good evening. Welcome to Monday's class on 7 factors of awakening. I'm Wai Chong. So we are going through the module on the factor of investigation of reality, which is the second among the 7 factors of awakening. The first factor is mindfulness, and followed by investigation of reality. And in these modules, we have been looking at how can we investigate, inquire into what we call reality, which is sort of abstract words, into our experiences, really, moment-to-moment experiences. And the whole function of investigation or inquiry is so that we are able to see things clearer. Hopefully, we see and we know reality as it is, which is a very common term used in Buddhist teaching, to see reality as it is, and to overcome any kind of distortion or delusion or mistaken understanding or misconception that we may have or we carry around, which are influencing or impacting our perception as well as how we respond to those perceptions. Yeah. So far in this module, we have looked at, first of all, look at how we apply mindfulness, in investigation. And we have also looked at, we are now in the process of looking at some of the general characteristics of our experiences, general characteristics of reality that we will be advised for us to investigate, to inquire, to pay close attention to. And this includes qualities like impermanence, because we do carry with us a lot of misconception or misperception. Just a natural kind of misperception. We human beings instinctively tend to hold on to things. We want things to be stable. We want to stabilize things. We want them to somehow hang around, And so philosophically, we use the word permanence, We're holding on to permanence when the reality of our experiences, the reality of things and objects and people and events in our life are by nature impermanent. They're subjected to change. They can't help it, but they have to change. That's their very nature. And so it is by investigating change and impermanence that help us to overcome our misperception and misconception of permanence. Yeah. The second general characteristic that is often mentioned is this idea of, usually in Buddhism, a lot of time people call it suffering or dukkha, the Sanskrit word. I like to call it lack of lasting satisfaction. Because follow on with the misconception of permanence or stability is, of course, a projection of things going to hang around and be around with us and going to continuously, in a long-lasting manner, provide us with whatever we want, satisfaction, happiness, security. So just as we hold on to things, we want things to be permanent, to be stable. We also want them to, to be a continuous supply of happiness and satisfaction. Hence, in our fairy tales, growing up, we have so many fairy tales where always conclude with living happily ever after. Of course, as we grown up and we have relationships, we work, we live in society, we realize that, happily ever after is a pretty hard thing to accomplish. And even on occasion where we are able to have a period of happiness, of satisfaction, that requires a lot of work to sustain and maintain and to overcome challenges and change. Yeah. So this second characteristic, lack of lasting satisfaction, it follows from impermanence. Since the various different things or objects in our life or conditions or experiences in our life that we view as pleasure, pleasurable, pleasant, as related to happiness or satisfaction. We investigate, we realize that it's not that they are not pleasant, but they don't last. So the pleasure we derive from it fade and change. The happiness and satisfaction we derive from them, from those experiences, from those people, relationship, objects, they don't last. So there is no lasting satisfaction in relation to things, object, events that are by nature subjected to change. So this is the second characteristics. Again, it is we investigate it because it directly address some fundamental mistakes, fundamental misperception and misconception that is very common among us, that we like to project and then hold on to the projected image. We project this person, this object, this experience is going to make me happy forever. It's going to be my lasting source of satisfaction. So we project that onto objects and people and experiences, and then we hold on to that projected image, taking it to be real, taking it to be true. When the reality is, if you were to scratch beyond the surface and really look into it, really pay close attention and inquire and investigate, we realize that that is not true. It's not that they are not pleasant or they don't bring satisfaction or happiness to us, but it's that the pleasure, the satisfaction, the happiness in those cases are not long-lasting. They are also subjected to change. Yeah. And if we are able to acknowledge that, if we're able to correct our understanding and our conception and perception of that, then it's not a problem because we have realistic expectation. We are able to relate to them as they are. Then that is not a problem. But usually that's not the case. Usually we hold unrealistic expectation. We project idealistic images and ideas onto things, objects, and whatever, and then hold on to those idealistic and unrealistic expectations. And precisely because of that, I've been talking about this discrepancy between what we expect or what we project and reality. And whenever we become aware of that discrepancy, or when it becomes so apparent that we can't ignore it, we can't deny it, we suffer over it, because the discrepancy is the discrepancy between what we long for and what we want and what is confronting us, the reality of this moment. So in order to not suffer, that if we are able to adjust our expectation and understanding to match with what is real and what is true, then there is no suffering, because we have now understand, we know and see things accurately as they are. Yeah. The third characteristics I've introduced is by the name selflessness, or something called emptiness, the lack of an independent, permanent, unitary self, which is building on the previous two, something we also instinctively grasp onto and hold on to. It's very deeply related to trying to hold on to something in the face of change. And of course, this is something we hold very dear. This is our sense of self, me, I. We hold that there is something, some kind of essence, so to speak, unchanging essence within somewhere. Nobody knows for sure, but instinctively we hold there must be something here that I call me or I or Wai Chong, that is so, which is my name, which is so essential that there must be something here. Otherwise it feels very scary. Feels like, so if everything changed, then who am I? There must be something here. They must stay unchanged. There's the essence of Wai Chong. There's the thing that make me who I am. And it's something so essential that so essential to my identity that I believe strongly, I hold strongly that it can't possibly change. It must always stay identical, unchanged. And that is our very instinctive grasping at such a self. Yeah. It doesn't mean that Wai Chong doesn't exist, but what is the nature of Wai Chong? What is the nature of this person? Is there something within this person there is truly an unchanging essence? Do we really need that? That's what we investigate. And first and foremost is to realize that maybe there is no such a self. The word self here is very specific. No such an unchanging, essential self. No, even though there's a name, Waichong, which I've been using for the last 50 years, it doesn't mean that just because the name doesn't change, that is referring to something here that is equally unchanging. And in fact, in the Buddhist teaching, which is the basis of this whole series of presentation, that is not true. It's not a one-to-one correspondence between a name and an essence or a thing, an object. And just because we keep using the same name doesn't mean that what is referring to remain unchanged, remain stable, remain permanent, and independent of all the changing conditions. It somehow will stay untouched by that. And we feel that we must have something here. There must be such a thing. First of all, to retain the sense of identity, and secondly, it somehow convey a sense of security and stability in the face of all this constant change that confront us in the daily life. We feel that we really need to hold on to such a self, or in certain contexts, people call it the soul, an unchanging soul, because otherwise life feels very scary. It feels like there's nothing stable and nothing solid, and everything changed. How can I find security? How can I find comfort and ease and happiness confronted by all these shifting, changing conditions? No. I must have a soul, and I must hang on to it. I must protect it. And the soul is not the self. Is not allowed to change. It must always stay the same. It must stay put, and it must somehow be so kind of independent and unaffected by changing conditions. And that is herein reside our perceived sense of security and safety. But in actual fact, maybe if we inquire and we investigate, we realize that there is no such an unchanging essence. There's no such thing. And maybe we don't even need it in the first place. Not only is it not true and not real, but it's not needed. I always always think in terms of an image, the analogy of a river. We may give one name to that river, whatever river. Growing up in Singapore, we have what we call the Singapore River, which of course been highly urbanized. There's a lot of built up along the bank of the river. It doesn't look like a river anymore. It looks like a ginormous. It's a canal, or I used to call it a ginormous drain. It used to be very polluted at one point, but now they clean it out of all the rubbish, and the water quality has improved. Yeah, but nonetheless, growing up, I was told that's the Singapore River. That's where I'm from, and that river has retained its name despite all the changes. You can look at old photos of it and the current photos and memories, and the river has changed. In fact, to be a river, the water, of course, has to be constantly flowing and changing. So as the saying goes, we cannot step into the same river twice. Has never stayed the same. In fact, it's in the process of constant change. But throughout all these years, we have just one single name, the same name referring to it. A river is an example of, even though the name seems the same and therefore convey a false sense of stability and unchangingness, the reality is the river never stops changing. The river, in fact, to exist, the river must change, the water must flow, and therefore it's ceaselessly changing. And that is fine, that's the nature of a river. And what's the point of having a river? And you probably wouldn't call it a river if the water never changed. It doesn't flow, it's sort of static, it's stuck, and becomes immune to change, independent of changing conditions. Well, first of all, there's no such river. And secondly, what's the point of having such a thing? It will probably stop being a river. So change is the essence. Change is the very nature of our life. And we probably don't really need to Although we need to get used to the idea of change, we need to get used to the idea of letting go of all this unchanging, this idea of some unchanging essence, unchanging core, which we call self, we call river. There's selflessness. Today I want to talk about something very closely related to all of them, and I call it conditionality, or something called dependent origination. And we're going to do two meditation related to dependent origination or conditionality, and just to get used to the idea that every experience we have is actually dependent on changing conditions. In fact, it's made up of changing conditions, dependent on changing conditions. Separate from those conditions, there's nothing there's no experience, that is apart from those changing conditions, and hence the term conditionality. That everything that we can know and experience, every experience we have is dependent on conditions, hence there is also a term, conditionality or dependent origination in Buddhism. And this is also quality that is very important to investigate, to inquire, and to become acquainted with it, and to start to think, change our attitude, our perspective, is to start to think in terms of conditionality. So this meditation we're going to do today is analysis of the 6 elements, and we can split into 2. First, we can look at the physical elements. The 4th is the earth, water, fire, air. And these are the constituents of ourselves as a person. Of course, these are ancient concepts, but it's still helpful in the meditative context. Maybe in the medical or scientific context, we no longer talk in this way. We talk about elements in terms of carbon, oxygen, nitrogen. But in the meditative context, it's still suitable to talk about ourselves, or what we are in terms of earth, water, fire, air. Because this is also how we experience ourselves. We experience there is a solid aspect of ourselves. There's part of ourselves that have the quality of solidity, of density, of weight, of heaviness, which is all the material, solid aspects of our body. There's the earth element. There's also the fluid, the liquid aspect of ourselves, which is the water element. There's the energetic aspects of ourselves. The part of easiest one is the body temperature. We have a sense of warmth. We try to maintain our body naturally maintain a constant body temperature, but also energy in terms of energy to work, to move, energy to allow us to think, and the energy that sustains our life. So there is fire element. Yeah. And the last is air element. The exchange of gases, of air, oxygen and carbon dioxide. And of course, in the ancient world, air element or wind element is also associated to movement, to activities. And so these are the 4 physical elements of water, fire, and air. And we can investigate our sense of self in relation to this. These are the physical aspects of the self. And the last 2 elements is space element and consciousness element. Space element in this case is not too abstract. It's just like we have a sense of inner space, right? We can first of all talk about physical space, the space of our chest cavity, the space of our abdominal cavity, the space in our stomach. Sometimes we eat too much, sometimes we fasting. We have a kind of sense of that capacity of our stomach, and also when we sinuses, we suffer from hay fever, or we're down with a cold, and we have difficulty breathing. We really feel and suffer from when our nasal cavity is blocked by mucus and so on and so forth. Or when we recover, then we really we are hopefully appreciative of the ability to breathe freely and easily. So that is cavity, space. Yeah. So there is one notion of space, a very physical notion of space. That there is inner space, and there's the outer space. Space, of course, can also be understood in a more abstract sense. My personal space, my private space in terms of a space like my home, in which I feel comfortable, relaxed. I can put down my guard, and I can settle back and not have to be constantly vigilant. So that's one notion of space. And the other one, of course, is personal space in terms of how close or how distant I feel towards others. The last element is consciousness element, which is the non-material aspect of ourselves, non-physical. Consciousness, at least in this particular context, is awareness. It refers to that aspect of ourselves in which we know, we are aware, we are conscious, we see, we hear, smell, taste, and sense through the body, the realm of thoughts, of concepts, of memories and fantasies, consciousness. Yeah. So instead of thinking of the self as a lump of something that we rarefy and we make concrete, even though it's still very abstract, and we hold that there must be something inside here among the body and mind that is unchanging, that can resist change and stay identical, and to which we rightfully can apply our name to, our soul, our unchanging essence. Instead of that, we can realize that, maybe we don't need it. Maybe the way we exist, we function, is actually in a very different manner. We have a different nature. Our nature is one of dependence, dependent on conditions, changing conditions. And what are those changing conditions? There's 6 of them, the 6 elements. And it is the interaction of these 6 elements, and continuous interaction, continuous change, upon which we can just label that and say, that's Waichong. What is Waichong? Waichong is the interaction of the earth, water, fire, air, space, and consciousness elements. Each of those elements are not static. Each of those elements is changing. It's the intertwined and interdependent relationship among these 6 elements. That is the basis of labeling Waichong. So this is the idea we want to explore today, and we just see how it goes. Start with the first 4 elements. We're going to do a meditation on the 4 elements, the physical elements, and I'll invite you to meditate on and meditate by bringing in our own memories, and reflection in a very reflective, analytical way to investigate. There's the outer earth element, there's the inner earth element. What's the relationship between the outer and inner? And likewise with the other 4, the rest of them. And to recognize that actually maybe we don't have no earth elements, no particular molecules, atoms. Can we lay claim and say this is permanently me, this is permanently mine? Instead, they're all in a cycle of exchange or interchange between the outer and the inner. And it's precisely this ever-moving, ever-changing cycle that allow us to stay alive, to function as who we are as a human being. The cycle of earth element, water, fire, and air elements. The day the elements stop cycling, the day they stop and they sort of stay put and become static instead of dynamic, is also the day we die. Life depends on this change and cycles. And life is dependent on such changing conditions. All right, so let's do a meditation and explore this aspect of it. And then we can look at the other 2 in the second meditation. So I invite you to find a suitable meditation posture. This is a kind of analytical meditation that I'm not sure you are familiar with or not, but it does involve thinking, remembering, playing around with ideas and images. So it's not the kind of meditation that most people are familiar with, which is calm abiding meditation. We're not just trying to focus on one thing and stay with it and that's it, and have single pointed concentration on it. That's not what we're going to do. We're just playing around with ideas and experiences and memories and looking at them, interacting with them, and trying out different perspectives until we come to have our own understanding, our own shift in our own understanding and perspective, and have our own kind of insight into it. Yeah. So first of all, let's settle our body back into a suitable meditation posture, be it sitting or lying down, whichever works best for us. We adopt a posture that feels stable and supportive to us, to our body. Good to rest our hands and arms on some kind of physical support so that we can transfer the weight of the arms onto that support, and we can relieve our shoulder muscles, arm muscles of that burden, that we don't have to keep them tense and tight to hold up the weight. Feel free to close the eyes completely or leave them open or half opened, whichever way works best for you. We take a few moments to allow the body to get used to the posture, to find its way into the posture. And if we are able to persuade our body to reassure it so that it feels well supported and safe in the posture, this will facilitate a process of loosening up, unwinding, whereby the body let go of some of those unnecessary contractions of muscles, those tightening and tensions. And as we let go of those unnecessary tension, our body starts to feel so much more relaxed, more at ease, and more comfortable in this posture. Next, let's take a few minutes at the beginning of meditation just to help body and mind to shift gears, to put aside whatever might be preoccupying them, influencing them, any agitation, any tensions, and so that body and mind can really settle down and settle back into a more meditative state. We do so with the help of the breath. And the breath will be a support for the rest of this meditation, as a support for our attention, that we can always come back to the breath if we do get distracted or confused. So become aware of the sensations associated with the breath. Allow ourselves to fully experience the in-breath and the out-breath. Coming back to the breath, be in touch with the sensations of the breath, so that we recognize the in-breath as the in-breath and the out-breath as the out-breath. Breathing out, this is an opportunity to release, to let go, to put aside any tension and tightness, let go of any concerns or worries or agitation. A good place to start is actually with our face, breathing out. See if we can persuade the facial muscles to relax, to let go of any tension and tightness at the forehead, at the jaw, or at the muscles around the eyes. And to welcome in a shift in experience, a feeling of softness, of ease and comfort into the face. And then we can allow this process of settling down to continue in the background as we shift our attention to the analysis of the four physical elements. Piggyback on the breath sensations. We reflect and think about the cycle of earth element. How does the outer earth element becomes the inner earth element? Given that we all start our life as a single cell embryo, we didn't bring along that much earth element with us at birth, at conception. Where does all the hard, solid aspects of ourselves, of our body, where does that come from? Breathing in, be aware that all of those earth elements, they come from the food we take in, come from the food via the placenta when we are in the womb of our mother, and subsequently in all the food we consume growing up, the milk we drink when we are a baby, the soft food, and subsequently all the meals we have taken in this life. Breathing in, that's how outer earth element flow and becomes inner earth element. Breathing out, how does inner earth element return to the outer? When we cut our hair, when we clip our nails, when we visit the toilet, when we shed our skin cells, inner earth element returns to the outer. So take a few moments attending to the breath as we follow the cycle in breath and out breath. In your own way, reflect on the cycle of earth elements. As we continue reflecting, becoming aware, the support of the breath, of the cycle of elements, we can ask ourselves, is there any atom of earth elements, any molecule of earth element that we can lay claim and say, this is the one that has never changed, it's always here. This is one that I can lay claim as me, as mine, as that unchanging self. When we feel ready, we can move on and reflect on water element, become aware of by way of our senses, by way of imagination, the water element within ourselves. After all, our body is made up of 70% of water. Where does all those water elements come from? Breathing in, reflect on how outer water element flows in and becomes inner water element. Breathing out, reflect on how the inner water element returns to the outer. Become aware of the cycle of ever-changing water element. Breathing in mainly through consuming, to drinking water. That's how outer water element enters and becomes inner water element. Breathing out through our sweat, through our tears, through our urine. That's how inner water element returns to the outer. As we appreciate this cycle of movement of water elements between outer and inner, we can reflect and investigate. Is there any water molecules we can lay claim, point to, and say, this is definitely me, this is definitely mine, this is my unchanging self. The next fire element, heat, energy, warmth. These are our association with fire elements. Breathing in, reflect a little on how outer fire element becomes inner fire element. Breathing out, reflect how inner fire element returns to the outer. Breathing in, remember being out in the sun, feeling the warmth of the sun's ray. We consume food, we're taking food that we digest and that we metabolize to release the energy to support our life. Outer becomes inner. Breathing out, we radiate heat at every moment through our constant body temperature. We exert ourselves, we work, we do this and that. We burn up the energy within our body in order to accomplish all that, which are then lost to the environment. That's how inner returns to the outer. So coming back to the meditation, to the breath, appreciate this movement that we call the cycle of fire element. Is there at any point, is there anything we can point to and hold to and say, this is definitely me, this is definitely mine, this is my unchanging self? And then moving on to the last of the physical elements, air elements. Breathing in, outer air elements flow in to our lungs, absorbed into the blood. Outer becomes inner. Breathing out, the carbon dioxide in our lungs is released. Inner returns to outer. As we attend to the breath, in and out, we can reflect on this exchange of the gaseous elements, exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide that is so essential to our life. This is the cycle of air elements. Coming back to the breath, breathing in and out, reflecting on the exchange of the air elements, the gaseous elements. Is there any particular molecule of oxygen or carbon dioxide that we can point to and lay claim and say, hey, this is me, this is definitely mine, this is my unchanging self. And lastly, is it possible for us right here and now exchange an image of ourselves as this static, unchanging physical body is somehow fixed and stable and steady, into a different image, into one that encompasses the 4 cycles of exchange and interchange of the 4 elements between the outer and the inner. With this vision, can we even say that the name, the word body, does it apply to a single entity, a single thing? Or is it just a convenient label referring to 4 ever-changing processes, 4 ever-changing cycles of earth, water, fire and air? Okay, so there is an example of an analytical type of meditation, the analysis of the elements. We just do 4 out of the 6. Analytical meditation doesn't have to be long, and quite often, at least for myself, I think it's quite short. The important is not so much the length, duration, but whether we are able to make use of the time to reflect deeply, to bring together different experiences, be it memories or through imaginations, and to turn them around in our mind, or to look at it from different angles, or try a new way of organizing those information, and to make some discovery for ourselves, to uncover a different pattern, a different perspective, a different way of understanding something, a new way of understanding it. And here, of course, we are trying to replace or displace an image, a concept of a body, which is part of self, a body as some kind of static, singular thing, in which because some of those images we hold are actually self-contradictory. We have the same body and yet it grows. We have it's identical. It has to stay identical, and yet at the same time it has to change. So those are contradictory qualities. Of course, we don't pay attention so much. We're not so aware of this self-contradictory kind of view that we tend to hold. But as we investigate, we uncover our own mistake, our own misperception, misconception, and we can try to replace it with and some new ideas and new understanding that are hopefully more accurate. So in this case, Instead of seeing the body as something static, as already formed, and therefore it doesn't change and it has to stay the same, we replace this static image of the body with something much more dynamic. That at any moments, day in, day out, right from the first moment of our life, all the way to the end, the body is these four elements, so to speak. It's ever changing, ever interacting, exchanging, and this process between outer and inner cannot be interfered with, cannot be stopped. Because the day we stop it, the day we stop having this kind of dynamic exchange, is also the way we die. Dead body, to some extent, it still does, but not like a living body, which is in this constant state of interchange. So that is the physical aspects of ourselves. And hopefully with this investigation, in our own way, we do have to figure out how to think about it. For what I just did is just an example, an illustration of how we can think. Hopefully we can have a different appreciation. We may have a shift in our perspective and say, oh, what we are used to view as a body, it's not that static. In fact, it's not even, sometimes you can say it's not even a thing. The word thing has a kind of a sense of being unchanging, a thing that retain continuously the same identity. Rather, it's more like a process, which is ever changing, always in the process of change. In this case, you can think of it as four intertwined, interdependent processes. Or you can think of it as a river, four different rivers. River is something that's ever flowing, ever changing, and the four metaphorical rivers intertwined to make up the physical aspect of ourselves, what we call, we label as the body. So what about maybe the sense of self or soul is something non-physical? Maybe it's something that doesn't change, that is identical but not physical. This is quite often how we think when we talk about conditionality and selflessness. Quite often we secretly think that, I just have to hold on to something that's not physical. It's not made of atoms, not made of molecules, not made of earth, water, fire, and air. No, but this mysterious thing will be what I rely on for my sense of identity, my sense of permanence and stability and unchangingness. And so in the Buddhist teaching, then we analyze and say, well, is there really such a non-material thing that we can lay claim and say, oh, that's myself. No worries, that's myself. This is the one that goes from one life and this lump of thing, this lump of non-material thing is what's going to go from one life and another. And this is my soul, this is my unchanging soul, and this is who I am. This is really what Wai Chong is all about. And even though after my body, I die and my body is decomposed, this ghost-like thing is going to float and find a new body and inhabit it, and voila, Wai Chong continues. So even in the idea of rebirth, even the Buddhist idea of rebirth, most Buddhists hang on to this. I don't think necessarily consciously, but subconsciously we hold on to this, let's call it spirits or ghosts, a ghost and spirit that doesn't change. That is not material, not physical, but doesn't change, must stay identical. This is the essence of me. This is the one that goes from one life to another, and this is the one that I grasp onto because it gives me a sense of safety, a sense of security, give me a sense of being not vulnerable, that I continue on and on as myself, as identical as myself. And the next set of analysis, we jump over space. We just analysis of consciousness is to address this, our grasping onto the non-material, non-physical aspects of ourselves as unchanging, as our permanent sense of identity. And this is actually a difficult one to analyze, the consciousness element. And But in the Buddhist presentation of consciousness, consciousness is not permanent. It's in fact very, very impermanent. It's constantly changing, and it's completely dependent on conditions, on changing conditions. So, for example, take the physical, the sense of seeing, of sight. Yeah, seeing in the Buddhist presentation is dependent on conditions. Dependent on the organ, the eye organ, dependent on the external conditions like the whatever visual objects we're referring to, and of course the light as well. And over and above that, it depends on our ability to bring forth an experience, a seeing experience of seeing, which is a kind of a conscious experience of seeing. So usually there are these three factors: the eye organ, the visual objects, which also includes all conditions of lighting and so on. Yeah, and thirdly, the eye consciousness or visual consciousness. Yeah. So these three are all intertwined and interdependent. If you have any one of them missing, then the experience of seeing will not happen. Doesn't happen. So if, let's say, the eye organ is not functioning, or if I close my eyelid, then I don't see anything. There is no experience of seeing, of visual experience of seeing. If there is no object or there's no light, pitch black darkness here, I also cannot have the experience of seeing. And likewise, let's say there's the eye, there's the eyeball, and there's light, there's object, but there is no consciousness. Like I'm unconscious, I fainted. So even though you open my eyes, and so the eyeball is there, the light does enter into it, no visual objects are in front of me. Internally within myself, there is no visual experience of seeing because I'm unconscious. No consciousness at that moment is not functioning, so to speak. There's no production of a conscious experience of seeing. So that's why it is more complicated, more abstract, this analysis of consciousness. So, but any moment of conscious experience is not something that stands alone by itself. It's fully and 100% dependent on all these conditions. This is true for all the physical senses. And likewise, it's also true for our mental sense, the realm of thoughts, thinking, memories, fantasy. Even that is also dependent on conditions. For example, at the time of sleep, deep sleep, let's say, not during dreaming, but at the time of deep sleep, there is no thinking, there is no consciousness at that moment, or we come under the influence of anesthesia when we go under, so to speak. There is no conscious experience, because of the conditions have changed in such a way that does not support the production of conscious experience. Yeah. So consciousness, in fact, is something subjected to conditions, dependent on changing conditions, is impermanent, it's not stable. The Buddha, in some of the teachings, actually say that if you want to latch onto and be attached to something, relatively speaking, stable, it's better to choose the body than consciousness. At least the body, although it changes, our body does change. The change, at least the visible change, is slower. It takes a long time to observe the body changes. So relatively speaking, the body is more stable, more constant, not perfect, not 100%, not all the time. But if we don't pay close attention, we are less aware of the changes in our body. In comparison, consciousness, the mind, is constantly changing. Like we are constantly thinking about this, doing this. The conscious experience is has a very high turnover. One moment is seeing, next moment is hearing, the next moment is thinking, and all of it goes. It's constant state of change. And this is, of course, very prominent when we start to meditate. We suddenly realize, oh wow, my mind is all over the place. one experience after another, the mind is hardly still and hardly stable. Hence, the Buddha said, if you want to latch onto something, if you are desperate to cling onto something stable and changing, the body is a better choice than consciousness. It's much harder to convince ourselves of our consciousness as something that is unchanging and stable. And precisely because consciousness changes one moment to another, which of this moment am I going to lay claim and label, oh, that's Waichong? So if Waichong is this moment, but with less than a second, in the next moment, this would have passed. Right? So in the next moment, this current moment would have passed, it's gone. Or we can make it more concrete. One moment of seeing is followed by a moment of hearing, followed by a moment of thinking. Which of these moments is me? If I'm the moment of seeing, then I would have disappeared by the next moment when it becomes a moment of hearing. And that would again disappear by the next moment when it becomes a moment of thinking. So consciousness, even though we just use a single word, is constantly, rapidly changing one moment to another. Not being stable, being completely subjected to and dependent on changing conditions. Is there any moment of consciousness can I lay claim and say, oh, that's my permanent self, that's my not unchanging self? And precisely because of this kind of analysis, the Buddha concludes that there is no independent, unchanging self. In fact, what is here is what we call dependent origination. Every moment of experience or conscious experience is 100% totally dependent on all these different changing conditions. There is nothing so essential and so resistance to change here. And I find this way of thinking, what I would like to call conditionality, or we call it dependent origination, very liberating, very freeing, because that means at any moment, who or what I am or what is my state is dependent on all those conditions. It's not apart, independent. In fact, it's 100% dependent on all those conditions. Of course, it's not possible for us to know all the conditions. So many of it is involved, but we can get a sense, And by paying attention to those conditions, it gives us information. Tell me about myself, right? So, for example, under conditions of feeling in general unhappy or low in energy, low in motivation, and that state of mind where I'm unhappy is conditions that fuel my impatience, my irritability. When I'm unhappy, it's much easier for me to react to situations with anger, with aversion, being irritated by things. I'm much less patient in that condition, under those sets of conditions. And otherwise, on the other hand, when I feel very happy, very contented, I feel quite joyous and light. And under that set of conditions, I'm much more patient. I'm much more willing to look things from the bright side, or look at the good side of things, and I'm more likely to respond from a place of kindness and compassion, and less likely to lose my temper, to get all upset about things. Right? So those are ways of thinking in terms of conditions. Likewise, in relation to another person, instead of applying a label and pigeonhole them and say that they will always be good, or they're always bad, they're always trustworthy, or they're always untrustworthy, maybe we can look at conditions again. Maybe under certain sets of conditions, this person will behave in a certain way, and under different contexts, different sets of conditions, it brought up other aspects of other qualities of the person. And so by reflecting on the conditions, it gave me insight into why this person behaving this way, and how this person is going to react. And I find that quite helpful. In that case, I don't need to fixate on a particular label: good person, bad person, friend, enemy, stranger. I don't have to fix them with one label. I can understand that under different sets of conditions, this person could be a friend. Under different set of conditions, a stranger. Yet other conditions could hurt and harm me. All depends on conditions. And that means that I find it easier thinking in this way, viewing a person in this way, to respond from a better part, a place with kindness, with compassion. Because I'm no longer, as I said earlier, stereotyping and pigeoning the people. I'm no longer kind of overgeneralizing situations, or have this kind of what we call in psychology, what they call all or nothing kind of thinking. It's either all of this or nothing, or black and white kind of thinking. In fact, it emits in many shades of gray, so to speak. Why? Because of conditions. Under one set of conditions is more white, another set of conditions is more darker. And as condition changes, the situation, the person, or whatever, it display different shades of gray. And that is fine, so long as I'm able to accurately detect or notice those conditions or whatever state they are in. I might be able to respond appropriately to that situation. All right, so that is conditionality or dependent origination. This next meditation, of course, is to explore the consciousness element. Maybe what I said is a bit abstract just now, but we can investigate for ourselves. After all, this is about investigation. Investigate for ourselves our own consciousness, our own conscious experiences. So long as we are conscious, we are not unconscious. We can, with mindfulness, with attentiveness and patience, we can investigate our own consciousness, which is not really a thing. Although we use the word consciousness, what it's referring to is really a whole, more like a river of ever-changing conscious experiences, one moment after another, temporarily, of course, in this case, one set of conscious experience replaced by yet another, and this continue from the moment we wake up in the morning up till we surrender such a our consciousness and settle into deep sleep. Yeah, and sometimes even in sleep, there's still conscious activity like dreaming. And we can hopefully see that it is actually a river of ever-changing experiences. And each of those moments, if you pick up any moment, why is it like this? Because it's dependent on the conditions that produce that moment. Just now, in the previous meditation class, the fire alarm went off here. So the sound of the alarm intrude into the meditation. Or actually, fortunately, I haven't started meditating. Intrude into the class. So that is a condition, and that trigger a cascade of a different reaction. So I have to stop, even though I'm live streaming. I have to go and turn off the alarm and so on and so forth. Yeah. So with change, then a different set of experiences unfold. That's true internally within our own conscious experiences. And we're going to do a meditation, and we'll investigate for ourselves, is this true or not? First of all, is consciousness made up of this whole series of moments of changing conscious experiences? And each of those moments, is it true to say that they are not independent? They are also dependent on their own sets of conditions. Right? This one would be more like a mindfulness meditation as opposed to an analytical one. I mean, we can think about it, but it's probably more convincing if we pay close attention and notice for ourselves what's going on. And the method I'm suggesting for you to use is, again, with labeling. We try to label the, it wouldn't be a moment, but the shorter duration of conscious experience. Using the breath as a support, we can label in breath, out breath, and that's what our attention is with. Our attention notice the in breath, our attention notice the out breath. We may find we don't do that continuously. It's interrupted with by hearing. Sounds arise with hearing, so that is yet another conscious experience. Interrupted by sensing. Certain bodily sensations become prominent and attract our attention, and that becomes the conscious experience of that moment. So sensing, in breath, out breath, or in, out, hearing, sensing. Because the fifth one is thinking, the mental activities of thinking. And we will find that our attention, and therefore our conscious experience from one moment to another, will shift among these five. Maybe you notice some other options. Well, it doesn't stay constantly with just one, but instead will be shifting here and there, back and forth. An indication that, of course, consciousness is not just one single unchanging element. Rather, the so-called conscious element is made up of a stream, a river of ever-changing conscious experiences. So let's do that and see what happens. So I invite you to settle back into a meditative posture. Take care that the back and spine feels comfortable in the posture you have adopted. And ensure that you maybe rest the hands and arms in some kind of support that allow your shoulders to be relaxed and to be as comfortable as they can be. Feel free to close your eyes or lift them open. If you lift them open, you have yet another set of conscious experience to take note of, which is seeing. So give the body a few moments to adjust, get used to the meditation posture. See if we can persuade our body to begin a process of releasing, of unwinding or loosening up, whereby it can let go of unnecessary muscular contractions and tensions at those parts of the body where they are no longer needed. A good place to kickstart this process is, of course, with our face. So often we unconsciously tense up muscles in the face, the muscles at the forehead, or those around the eyes, or muscles at the jaw. See if we can persuade some of those tensions, muscles to relax, to let go of those tensions, and welcome into our conscious experience a feeling of softness, of ease and comfort at our own face. So let's start by contacting the sensations of the breath within our body, throughout the body, so that we are able to fully experience our in-breath and our out-breath. Coming back to the breath, reconnecting our attention to the breath. See if we can allow ourselves to pay attention to notice the in-breath and the out-breath. attending to the breath. If you like, you don't have to, but if you like, you can make a label, a short label. When you are aware of yourself breathing in, label that as in. And when you are aware of yourself breathing out, label that as out. So in represents awareness of in-breath, out represents awareness of out-breath. So hopefully when we say the word in, we are in connection, we are in touch, we are aware of the sensations of the in-breath, likewise with the out-breath. Before long, we'll find that the experience, conscious experience of the in and out breath will be interrupted by other conscious experience, such as hearing sounds in the surrounding, hearing sounds coming from within our own body. Label that as hearing. There's the conscious experience of hearing. Yet another type of conscious experience would be sensing. Sensing the tensions or relaxation, sensing the changing tactile sensations within our body, at different parts of our body, hardness, softness, tightness, looseness, heaviness, lightness. Maybe by now you notice yet another type of conscious activity, thinking. Thinking in terms of words, thinking in terms of visual images created by the mind. Thinking will include memories, remembering. Thinking can also include fantasy, imagining. Coming back here now, attending to our changing moment to moment conscious experience, applying a label where we feel appropriate, in, out, hearing, sensing, and thinking. Coming back to here and now, continue to attend to our changing conscious experiences, applying labels if you so want, if you wish to have you see clearly. If possible, we can also reflect and pay attention and see whether we can discern the underlying conditions to give rise to these ever-changing conscious experiences. What sort of conditions promote one form of conscious experience over others? What sort of conditions allow us to put aside certain kinds of conscious reactions? What are the conditions that are affecting our moment-to-moment experience? So coming back to here and now, returning attention to the breath, using the breath as a support, noticing, paying attention to the variety of conscious experiences, in, out, hearing, sensing, thinking. Is it possible for more than one of them to occur simultaneously? Is it possible for us to hear and sense at the same moment, at the same time? Is it possible for thinking and sensing, thinking and hearing to occur simultaneously? Coming back here and now, attending to the breath, attending to the different conscious experiences. Is it possible for us to see our consciousness not as a single unchanging entity, but as a river flowing through time, a river made up of ever-changing moments of different kinds of conscious experiences, breathing in, breathing out, hearing, sensing, thinking. And then finally, we can ask ourselves, confronted with this river of ever-changing moments of conscious experiences, is it possible for us to point to any one moment and say, this is me, lay claim as mine, and that this is my unchanging self? Okay, so what we have done today is look at conditionality and dependent origination. Another of the general characteristics that we can investigate. In particular, we can hopefully look at the self, our sense of self, of I, or Waichong, so to speak, in my case, not as one name corresponding to one single entity or thing or some unchanging stuff, one-to-one, but instead it's actually a name given as a convenient reference to ever-changing river of conditions, some of which are physical, like earth, water, fire, air, and space, you can group it under that, and some of which is not physical, conscious experiences that arise and then displaced and replaced by yet other moments of conscious experiences. Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, sensing, thinking. And it's like 6 different rivers, if you want to say, intertwine against, into this whole process of changes. I refer to just for convenience, by convention, I give it a single name, Waichong. But in actual fact, it's not a single thing. That it's just a whole series of changing conditions. So there is a kind of discrepancy there. On one hand, there is one name, just one name. And for the past 50 years, I've been using the same name, so to speak. And yet what it's referring to has changed and changed and changed. It's constantly interacting. It's just many different conditions, other conditions. Remember the cycle of exchange or interchange of earth, water, fire, and air. Remember the river of conscious experiences that never stay put, never stay still. One moment is replaced by another. So we are using just one name to refer to this complexity of changing conditions. Yeah, and we probably need to do that, because otherwise, if we give each moment a name, we will be swarmed with many, many names, and that is not convenient and not practical. And so we just need to settle on one single name, in my case, Waichong, and that is good enough on a conventional level to refer to this set of changing conditions, upon which, of course, who I am is 100% dependent on all those conditions, and will continue on right up to the moment of death. And what happened beyond, I don't know. There's something we can all think about. Okay, so that is my presentation of conditionality and dependent origination and other of the characteristics that we can investigate. That's it from me this evening. I hope it's something helpful and may give you some ideas and ways of looking at ourselves, maybe hopefully a different perspective. And so I wish you have a good week ahead, and hope to see you back here next week. So thank you and good night.